Yo, what's going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to another episode of Levitation, the Sunday series. And today's topic I got from my reading that I read yesterday morning. And it came from 1 John chapter 5, verse 2. And it says, "This is how we know that we love God's children, when we love God and obey His commands. For this is what love for God is, to keep His commands." All that sounds good, right? And all that I agree with. But then I got to this part. It says, "And His commands are not a burden, because everyone who has been born of God conquers the world." This part confused me because it's basically saying that the commands of God should not be a burden to you. I don't know about anybody else, but when it comes down to me, obeying some of God's commands is hard to do. It's a burden. I mean, there's been times when I know I was tempted to do certain things, and going against that temptation, it was so hard, it was so burdensome to do. But this just said that God commands isn't a burden. So I was confused, and I thought maybe I'm doing something wrong. Maybe I'm following wrong. Maybe I'm not fully changed. All these thoughts of doubt started to creep into my mind. So I prayed and I asked God, I said, "God, you're going to have to clear this up for me to understand it. Give me understanding of what this means or what you're trying to tell me through this." And the realization is, the reason why it's so hard is because the proper love for ourselves isn't there. Let me explain. God is love, right? He's the definition of it. He's it. But to really operate in love, you have to follow His commands because He is love. That even includes the love that we have for ourselves. That's a major important part that we often kind of blow over. See, when Jesus gave the commands to love God and to love your neighbor, in that verse it says love your neighbor as you love yourself. So that means before you can love your neighbor, you have to have the proper love for yourself. One of the major issues that we all go through is that we've been taught by society and by the world that showing proper love to ourselves is by acquiring things. The world standards of loving yourself is fulfilling your desires. So you're loving yourself by acquiring wealth. You're loving yourself by getting all of these materialistic things. You're determining your value and your worth by how much you can accomplish, how much you're achieving. So if we're basing our worth on these things, our own understanding of self-love is based on those things, based on us getting those things. Now, don't get me wrong, these things aren't wrong to desire. But when you measure your worth and your value by these things, that's when the true love for yourself starts to disappear behind those things. And the thing is that none of these things can bring true value. So if they can't bring true value, chasing after those things is false love, misdirected love for yourself. But see, God, who is love, loved us before we even did anything. He loved us based on the simple fact that we are His creation. And even though we are so far from where He wants us to be, He still demonstrated the greatest act of love for us. God saw value in us when we were still trash. So if God, loved us just because we're His creation, then that should be enough value for us to value ourselves and love ourselves. If we can't love ourselves the way God loves us, how can we then reciprocate that love back to God? And how can we show that love to other people? Well, you might say, "Well, I do love God." But in the previous scriptures, it says to love God is to follow His commands. To love yourself, to love other people, and to love God, you have to follow love's command. And that's where the struggle comes into play. God commands goes totally against the way the world operates. If you measure your worth based on the world standards, there's going to be an automatic resistance to follow God's way. This is what makes it so hard. But let's go back to the verse. It says, "Because everyone who has been born of God conquers the world." If you've been born by God, meaning you've adopted a new nature. What nature? The Spirit. Being born of God means that you renounce the world standards and follow God. And when you live in the Spirit, you learn to appreciate the commands. Again, following His commands is the ultimate showcase of love. But your love is based on the fact that God, the Creator, love itself, loves me in my flaws, loves me enough to want to see me do better, be better. And His desire is that He wants us to reciprocate that same love that He's shown us to ourselves, to Him, and to other people. This type of love, without having any type of accomplishments attached to it, this type of love brings contentment. Philippians 4:11 through 13 says, "Not that I was ever in need, for I have learned how to be content with whatever I have. I know how to live on almost nothing or with everything. I have learned the secret of living in every situation, whether it's with a full stomach or empty, with plenty or little. For I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength." That love that you have and the love that you learn to have for yourself, you're not chasing after things, but you learn to be content. Now, don't get me wrong. Contentment doesn't mean stagnation, not to move forward. But contentment means in every circumstance, in every situation, you appreciate where God has you in that moment. And even though you may want more, but you're willing to appreciate and thank God for where He has you right now and willing to learn whatever lessons He's trying to teach you in this circumstance. With this perspective, with this true love for ourselves, we'll see that the things that we're chasing and striving after will become less and less important. And the things and the values and the commands of God will take its place. This process makes it easier to follow God's commands. You'll be able to find the value in obedience. But obedience is love. Let's not practice love on a conditional basis. But let's practice really loving ourselves, other people, and loving God. This is Levitation, where we're reaching our highest potential. Stay blessed.